In July 1937, a clash near the Marco Polo Bridge swiftly escalated into open warfare. Japanese troops advanced relentlessly, capturing Beijing and Tianjin with overwhelming force. Chiang Kai-shek, recognizing the gravity of the threat, mobilized his divided nation. The next battleground was Shanghai, a vibrant metropolis and symbol of Chinese resilience. For 3 brutal months, the city endured fierce street fighting, devastating bombardment, and immense civilian suffering. Although Shanghai ultimately fell to the invaders, China's determination to resist had only just begun. In the early 20th century, Japan emerged from its feudal chrysalis as a formidable industrial and military power. Victories over China in 1895 and Russia in 1905 emboldened the island nation, but more than just pride was at stake. Japan, with limited natural resources, eyed the Asian mainland hungrily. China, on the other hand, was in disarray. The Qing dynasty had collapsed in 1912, replaced by a fledgling republic. Warlords carved up provinces, the central government was weak, and by the 1920s, 2 rising factions, the nationalists, Kuomintang, under Chiang Kai-shek, and the communists under Mao Zedong, vied for control. Japan first tested its ambitions in 1931, manufacturing a railway sabotage incident in Manchuria as a pretext to invade. Within months, the Kwantung Army seized the region, establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo. The League of Nations condemned it. Japan shrugged. The world turned away. This was not an isolated grab. It was a preview. In the Japanese High Command, China was a land to be dominated, rich in resources, weak in defense. A greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, they claimed. Empire, they meant. Tensions simmered until 1937, when a skirmish at the Marco Polo Bridge exploded into a full-scale war. The Japanese invasion of China had begun, and it would become one of the bloodiest chapters in modern history. In July 1937, the clash at Marco Polo Bridge escalated rapidly. Japanese forces poured into Beijing and Tianjin, facing limited resistance. Chiang Kai-shek, recognizing the threat, finally committed his forces, ending the uneasy internal truce with the communists. China would resist, but at a terrible cost. The next target was Shanghai, a cosmopolitan city of immense symbolic and strategic value. The Battle of Shanghai, from August to November 1937, became a brutal, grinding urban war. Chinese troops fought with unexpected ferocity, inflicting significant casualties on the invaders. Yet the Japanese had air superiority, naval support, and heavy artillery. Neighborhoods were flattened. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. After 3 months, Shanghai fell. But this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something far worse. With momentum, Japanese forces advanced toward the heart of nationalist China, Nanjing, the capital. As they approached, the government fled to Chongqing. But the civilians and garrison left behind would bear the brunt. Section 3, Horror in Nanjing, a city's nightmare, 1,000 words. When Japanese troops entered Nanjing in December 1937, the city fell into darkness. For 6 weeks, the Nanjing massacre unfolded. Over 300,000 civilians and prisoners of war were killed, bayoneted, beheaded, machine-gunned. Tens of thousands of women were raped. Entire families were wiped out. It wasn't warfare. It was slaughter. Foreigners who remained, like German businessman John Rabe and American missionary Minnie Vautrin, tried to shield civilians in safety zones. Their diaries and footage would become vital historical evidence. The Japanese command denied responsibility. Some claimed rogue units were to blame. Others celebrated the carnage as victory. Internationally, outrage surged, but with Europe teetering on the edge of war and the US mired in isolationism, no military response came. China stood alone, but it did not fall. Chiang Kai-shek rallied what forces remained. The government entrenched itself in the mountainous interior. Guerrilla fighters harassed Japanese supply lines. The Red Army, too, began building its strength in the shadows. The war was far from over. From 1938 to 1941, Japan occupied China's eastern seaboard but could not conquer its spirit. Chinese forces used scorched-earth tactics, destroying roads, crops, and infrastructure to slow the invaders. The Japanese, frustrated by stubborn resistance, responded with further atrocities, chemical weapons, collective punishments, and mass killings. One of the fiercest stands came at Wuhan in 1938. Though the city eventually fell, the prolonged resistance proved that Japan's war would not be easy. In the north, communist forces launched guerrilla operations, building support among peasants while clashing with both the Japanese and sometimes nationalists. The situation on the ground devolved into a grinding war of attrition. Japanese forces were overstretched. Their brutality only deepened resistance. Yet, diplomatically, China's plight remained a side story to the looming global conflict. That would change on December 7, 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. With the United States entering World War II, China gained an ally, and Japan gained another front it could not afford. Section 5, Allies and Turning Points, China in World War II, 1,000 words, Pearl Harbor changed everything. China, once isolated, was now part of the Allied powers. The China-Burma-India theater opened, with the US supplying Chiang's forces via the treacherous Burma Road and later through airlifts over the Himalayas, the hump. But coordination was poor. Chiang distrusted his American advisors. General Joseph Stilwell clashed repeatedly with Chinese leadership. Meanwhile, Mao Zedong's communists grew stronger in the shadows, gaining support through disciplined guerrilla warfare and populist reforms. Still, Japan was faltering. Stretched across the Pacific, facing brutal defeats at Midway, Guadalcanal, and in the Philippines, its empire began to crumble. In China, Japanese offensives like Operation Ichigo in 1944 gained territory but exhausted resources. The nationalist government, though corrupt and fractured, held on. Communist forces gained control of swaths of rural China. Then, in August 1945, the sky over Hiroshima lit with fire. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, combined with the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, broke Japan's resolve. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. On September 9, Japanese forces in China laid down their arms. The war was over, but China's wounds were far from healed. Over 20 million Chinese civilians and soldiers had died. Cities lay in ruin, farmlands were scorched. And now, the uneasy truce between the nationalists and communists crumbled. Within months, full-scale civil war erupted. The communists, strengthened by their wartime strategy and popular support, defeated Chiang's forces. By 1949, Mao Zedong declared the People's Republic of China. Chiang retreated to Taiwan. The Japanese invasion had united China against a common enemy, but that unity was always fragile. The legacy of the invasion lives on, in memorials, in textbooks, in the tense relationship between China and Japan to this day. It is a story of conquest and resistance, of horror and heroism, of war crimes and whispered survival. It is a story history cannot afford to forget.